friends, and welcome to Seeking the Sacred Self. I'm your host, Naomi Rozak. Before I start today, I'd love to ask a favor of you. Would you take the time to like, rate, review, or subscribe or follow this podcast? It helps people who might be looking for content like mine to find it organically. And if there's an episode you've really loved or resonated with, could you take time to share it with others too? That would be so helpful to me. Before I introduce today's topic, one part of what I'm doing with this podcast is presenting life from a felt sense. That means through the world of what it feels like to be human and in our bodies. Because we do a lot of thinking and feeling, but sometimes we just learn big psychological vocabulary for our states of being, and those words don't resonate with what it actually feels like to be inside of us. So I talk about life through the feeling lens so that we sense ourselves in the stories, we feel less alone, and we can gain more understanding of our inner worlds without shame. So today will be the same. I want to talk about being a victim, but not from the sense of putting a microscope over the victim and labeling its parts with technical terms, but being inside a victim and how it feels and what the struggles of a victim are. And also how it feels to be uncomfortable with people like that, who don't seem to have personal power and action as some of their tools for life. My hope is that through this episode, we will come to see where each of us has lost or gained power, how we can see each other with more grace and compassion and acceptance, and learn that even if we approach life differently, we actually have a lot in common. And none of us deserve judgment or labeling for things we have encountered in life and how we have responded to them. I really want to approach this topic with gentleness because there's a lot of shame and fear and harm sewn into us by the ways others perceive us and the labels they put on us. Just know that when I use the word victim, it's not because I love the label. I'm just trying to communicate a perception that others will understand about someone who has lost some of their tools to navigate life and is often frozen in inaction or fear. There is absolutely no moral judgment attached to being a victim. Let me start with a story. I had lived with my dad in Edmonton, Alberta, when I was aged 14 to 17. This was a period of 2 years and a few months. My dad was not Christian. He was not part of the message church that I had been brought up in. And when I became a Christian through the message again, I felt that it was smarter for me to go back to live with my mom, who was a Christian and could provide what we called headship or leadership back at that time. So I moved from Edmonton and a church of, 200-ish people with a strong youth group to back to living with my mom in Mount Pearl, Newfoundland, where we had just a small church, like 30, maybe 35 people. There was really not much of a youth group. I didn't have any real close friendships. During that time, I was finishing high school at a private Baptist school, which had about, 24, 26 kids from kindergarten to 12, and really no one for me to connect with there either. And I felt I had followed God's will to go back and live with my mom, but I ended up feeling so alone, depressed. I had low self-esteem. I felt abandoned by God. Our church environment was very emotionally unfriendly. And what happened was I ended up laying in bed for hours, feeling either numb and not feeling much, or feeling extremely negative and hopeless and feeling really stuck. And I didn't have the personal awareness to know why this was happening. I just lived in that awful feeling world, or a world of no feeling. And both of those were awful. By the time I was 19, I also had physical factors contributing. I was binging food. I was gaining weight because of that. I also was starting to have allergy attacks caused by environmental things, and I'm sure the state of my body. I was often drinking a lot of caffeine to kind of get through the day. I was over exercising, sometimes 2 or more hours a day, because I was trying to get away from these difficult thoughts and feelings and from a very anxious brain and from feeling so awful about myself. So I would lay in bed for hours feeling nothing except bad. I just felt bad inside. In later years, I'd look back at that and try to figure out what the depression was, because for sure, my nervous system was in overdrive and really struggling, especially with the health issues. I was allergic to like all the grass and all the trees outside, and that was tough. But at first, I thought the depression was hopelessness. That's what I would have defined it as, and I think that's true. But then I realized it was partly about voicelessness too, because in response to my parents' divorce, I had lost my voice, my ability to speak about my own experience. And more lately, I've come to realize kind of the full scope of what that depression was. It was powerlessness. It was feeling that my life and how my life was going was out of my control. It was feeling like I really didn't have a lot of choice. And the trouble was, I wasn't aware of where the feelings came from, and so I couldn't do anything about it. In our extreme religious environment, most things outside of my home were seen as evil. We had to stay away from them. And I felt like I had to be perfect in my people-pleasing tendencies so that I didn't make people angry, which meant I did even less experimenting and made less choices. And my whole life was laid out for me. Just take care of home, get married, have kids. And it felt like I would always feel awful about myself. Nobody would ever love me. No one wanted to be my friend. That wasn't true, but this is just everything that was going on inside of my body. I was in a depressive type environment. It was just my mom and I with no friendships and a church that was very harsh in atmosphere with long, loud preaching and a lot of critical tone to the preaching. And I was there 3 times a week for several hours. The presence of religion in our home and the rules around it meant that there was little chance to experiment, to find what I loved, to become who I was. And add into that my parents' divorce, which I had responded to by becoming quiet and small and hiding away. And I was just someone who didn't know that I could have a choice about my life in any way. No wonder I felt powerless. No wonder I couldn't get out of my bed. Even if I did, it felt like there was nothing to live for. I had lost my ability to choose my life when I was young and had never found it again, and I wasn't aware of this. And so I dragged around this weight of feeling stuck. I'm just stuck here, and there's nothing I can do about it. This is going to be my whole life. I hope you will have compassion with the people in your life who suffer from depression. In a spiritual sense, it's a response to a heavy wounding in our sense of personal power and safety and our ability to choose. And now I just want to add a note here because we're going to talk about what is a victim and how would you recognize someone that we put that label on. And as I talk about how we might identify someone who feels powerless, note that the descriptions may sound a little extreme, and that's because I'm attempting to highlight behaviors and feelings, but there is no judgment attached to my description of these. So what is a victim? A victim is someone who experienced a violation of some kind that either literally stripped away their power, their ability to choose or act on their own behalf, or caused them to perceive their power was stripped away, whether in a moment, like in an assault, or over a longer period of time. As examples, we talk about victims of war, victims of assault, victims of harmful parenting, victims of an unsafe physical environment, such as tripping on someone else's unshoveled sidewalk, and so much more. A victim often experienced something incredibly unsafe or violating, in which they should have been protected by somebody with more power or wisdom or experience, or could not protect themselves, or they made a subconscious choice not to fight or protect themselves, so that they didn't attract even more harm. All of this contributes to a victim as someone who feels stuck, unsafe, and afraid, and not only at that original event, but almost all the time. What they experience in their body is that something feels wrong. They have to try very hard just to do basic little activities, just to try to function and survive, but they may often feel helpless or hopeless, fearful, heavy, weighed down. And because of this, they may express that discomfort in ways that feel heavy or difficult for other people. And inside the victim is a fear that at any moment they might do one little wrong thing and the whole world will come crashing down around them. They never know what the wrong step might be. There's just a tremendous lack of safety in their world, of feeling secure and okay, especially if something goes wrong. It is so important to understand what it feels like to have been victimized. To recognize someone who is experiencing life as a victim, you might notice they often talk about the pain, the trauma, the loss of something or someone. They may express a behavioral pattern that affects relationships, like complaining, clinginess, self-pity, what we label as passive aggressiveness, what we interpret as negativity. They may talk about how hard their life is a lot and you don't hear much positive. A victim may respond with fear or terror, anger, or inflexibility when presented with ideas, choices, change, or advice. They may not look or act too differently from anyone else, but you may hear that they suffer from depression. They're quiet or anxious or withdrawn. They don't talk a lot in public. You might just think they're introverted, but their sense of powerlessness increases that introversion. A victim may work hard to control lots of pieces of their lives so that they aren't faced with difficult things as often. And so this control might look like people pleasing or pandering to others' emotions so they don't have to face relationship difficulties. It may be not leaving their house a lot or avoiding conflict or hiding. And all of these things can be on a spectrum from very minimal or not easily recognized to full-blown. I never felt like I expressed myself extremely negatively, but I felt negative, and I had a hard time with so much of life. The thing is, I also felt so unsafe that I had to please people and keep others around me happy. And I knew somehow that complaining and negativity would push people away, so I had to stifle how I felt and not express it, which meant people probably thought I was doing a lot better than I was. And I was often wearing a mask in public, even though I didn't mean to, and I wasn't really thinking any of this through. It was just happening inside me. Nobody would have guessed that I felt as stuck and unhappy and powerless as I did. So you can see that's a lot. That's a lot to experience. And when you are in a relationship with someone who is living in that state, this might also feel difficult for you. You want to help, but you don't know how, or you feel exhausted because you've been trying to help for a long time and this person doesn't seem to want to change or get better. And as part of my advocacy for us to understand and have more compassion for victims, we need to understand that many things contribute to a misunderstanding and judgment of the victim's state. One of these reasons is that our society has been indoctrinated to believe that those who work hard and can act for themselves are morally superior. We see productivity and people who fall in line with our expectations as the desired way to be. And people that can't just fall in line and be productive members of society are looked down on. I saw a comment online recently that said, "Oh, this is a whole generation of victims." And there's an inferred insult in that statement. What it's not making space for is the wounding of this generation and the fact that we also have become more honest about our inner experience, more emotionally intelligent. And we're also dealing with a world that is so much more complex and difficult than it was many years ago. Not that every generation hasn't had their difficult things to face, but there's an acknowledgement of a supreme amount of pressure happening right now. And some of the pain that's inside all of us is beginning to come out. In that person's comment about a generation of victims, there is likely that person's own pain about what in their experience hasn't been recognized and how hard they had to work to get through life. And so all this pain coming up in maybe like the person who makes the comment or the generation of so-called victims they were talking about is that we can get triggered by others. For the person who made this comment, I would guess that something in victimhood is triggering for them and may also reflect some of their own pain that they haven't been allowed to express or to heal. So there's no moral superiority because one person didn't lose their sense of power and action and another did. And I'm going to talk about this in a couple of minutes a little more. I do think underneath it all, even with that person's comment, there's still a bit of concern because there is a little bit of truth here. We are not meant to live inactive, stuck in ourselves, without our sense of personal power. At our core, there is a desire to somehow contribute to the world, some form of effort or work that does help us to feel good and to feel like we're a part of things. And sometimes we even heal and grow as we learn to take action on things even when we're scared. So there's definitely a balance to be found, but we won't find that balance in judging and criticizing each other. One more thing that contributes to the misunderstanding of victims is we have this idea that anything that is wrong should be fixed, what I call the fix-it mindset. We believe that the victim is a burden, and this can be felt both in a person judging the victim and in how a victim judges themselves. And so the perspective looking at the victim is, oh, you're a victim. It's wrong to be a victim. Nobody wants to be around that. Fix it. Or we know that acting like a victim, being a victim is shamed, and so we feel we have to heal ourselves, but we don't have a clue how to start. And inside, we feel the sadness and rage of someone who just needs to be accepted and loved as they are, not putting more pressure on someone. The perspective is that bootstrapping is the idea. We need to work to be valuable. Don't cost society or others any effort or any money or any time. Just suck it up, princess. Nobody likes a burden, we say. But then the only solution we offer is try harder. When the truth is, people who suffer as victims have often been trying very hard, sometimes for decades, just to live, just to minimally function, pushing themselves every day past this weight that sits inside them, terrified of the world, scared of anything that could upset the delicate balance that they have had to work very hard to maintain, and often hating themselves while they do it. And what I want to assure you is that the person who has no power or feels stuck desperately wants change, doesn't want to feel this way, but they really have not yet found anything that will resolve the source of pain and difficulty. And so in essence, they are stuck. They don't have the right tool, and advice is too surface. It doesn't hit where the pain is. And then a third way we also malign the victim is by a concept in the spirituality and healing world. Maybe we, as a victim, have started to heal and are finding a way forward, and often we are finding some spiritual path as part of our healing. Maybe some of what we come across in our spiritual seeking is this manifesting and positive vibes world, and we hear people judging the victim mindset, telling others that they won't grow or heal as long as they think or act like a victim. They need to get over their limiting beliefs and realize they can make a change. And really, this is just one more way of judging a victim without doing the work of getting to know the person. And I think it can sometimes be well meant because the person talking may be someone who once struggled with all the symptoms of being a victim themselves, and somehow they've now tapped into their own sense of their power to choose and to feel safe. And they know that feeling that inner strength can absolutely transform their lives. And at the bottom of it, they want transformation for you too. But I think we need to be really careful about how we express that. knowing and sharing that there might be more wonderful possibility for someone if they could shift, or instead causing them to feel shame for where they are two very different things. I did see a post the other day where a gentleman shared his own experience of victimhood and how he was searching and felt like he really didn't have any control over his choices. And then in time, he did learn that he could be responsible for the choices he made and found a lot of freedom in that. And to me, that is the way we can share, is when we tell our stories and our own experience of realizing and healing. This is one way of helping others to understand they can also heal and make their own choices. And it's a very empathetic way of sharing what is possible for all of us. And then one more difficult viewpoint we come across in the spirituality and healing world is that someone who has never been in the victim mindset may think that they are more healed, more whole, or better because they know how to take control in their own lives. They criticize a person who can't seem to get it together. They can't stand being around someone who complains or struggles with simple things. And so I want to be clear here that not acting like a victim is not more superior on the healing ladder than acting like a victim. There is no healing ladder. There is only ever your own journey and someone else's journey, and they can't be compared because the journey is you going inside you, and their journey is them going inside themselves. Those are completely different journeys in completely different inner environments. And healing is always a spiral that just goes deeper and deeper inside you, healing new layers as time goes on. Victim or not victim are states of perception of life events, and these can easily shift when we learn a different perception and can address the original wound in just the right way. So in the same way that sitting in a state of victimhood is a response to trauma and difficulty, so also are overaction, hyperactivity or hyperresponsibility, fierce independence and control, and extreme hustle, all of which we can see in the spirituality world sometimes. And we use those same things to feel safe and build a sense of worth because we don't have a connection to our core, that sacred and whole part of us. And we can think that keeping our thoughts positive and working hard towards our goals means we're better or more correct than the victim. And if they just say their affirmations and work a little harder, they'd get what you have too, right? It's very easy to tell someone, you're a victim, you need to get out of that mindset, or to give them a piece of advice that you're sure will fix them, and then feel so disturbed when they don't change, when they don't take your advice. And then you just wash your hands of them because clearly they don't want to change, or they would just the same way you do. They would push themselves. They must not be spiritual, right? Because they didn't do what you told them to do. But there is a much better way to navigate the differences between victim and not victim, which is a way of accepting ourselves and accepting others. And it's called empathy, which is putting ourselves in the shoes of others and working harder to understand how they feel while also doing the same thing for ourselves. What we need to understand here is that we have all been victims of something. Difficult things have happened to every one of us, but some of us respond by taking more power and control of our lives, sometimes swearing we will never be hurt again and building up a protective armor and an individuality that can't be pierced by anyone else. And some of us give in to the pain, often the more highly sensitive or more anxious kiddos to start with. We collapse, we go silent and scared. We operate in a near continual state of overwhelm, feeling like it's all too much. And we are also trying to never be hurt again, but we don't have the armor to protect us. And you never know the full extent of someone's story, what they may have been through. They may have been through something so horrific, you would forever remove your judgment of them and only ever feel compassion, even if they never healed a moment of their lives. I want to stop here for today, but what I'm attempting to do with this episode is to call for more compassion when reviewing the victims, and to understand that the victim deserves so much compassion and doesn't deserve the harsh treatment we give them that means they often cannot heal. They're actually held back from healing because of the way they're treated for not being good enough or performing well enough in our lives. And then to understand that even the fact that we are so reactive to victims and their burdens often means that we too are carrying difficult burdens. And some of us can be both of these things. We can be both victim and controlling and fiercely independent and all those things. Those are protective mechanisms in themselves as well. And so the more we understand what a victim is and what a response to trauma is and how it affects us, the more we can calm down just a little bit and use compassionate language when we talk about each other and we talk about the difficult things in life. And we can use our reactions to tell us where something inside of us may be asking for more care and love. So the episode next week will go into what it feels like to be an adult living without their personal power and safety, and how both the victim and the person who is more critical of the victim can build that compassionate awareness of themselves and each other. And I'll share more personal stories and talk a little bit about what the victim actually needs to heal and the different kinds of personal power that are available to us and what the journey of regaining those pieces may look like. As always, if you have further questions or something you'd like to say, I invite you to comment on YouTube or send me a DM on Instagram at Sacred Self Guide. And stay tuned for next week's episode when we'll go a little deeper again.